speaker today. We're really very pleased, very honoured to have today Alastair McIntosh, who is the founder of the GalGael Trust. Kenneth White is one of its patrons.
Is the patron. I'm one of the founding trustees.
Founding trustees, and Kenneth White is the patron. You will have an opportunity tomorrow morning to visit the GalGael Trust. We'll give you all the details. We're meeting at the main gate at 9:45, and we'll be coming back in time for lunch. We'll be visiting also Govan Old Church and the Govan Stones, all very emblematic sites for the Celtic heritage in Glasgow and for geopoetics, as you will soon find out. Let me just say that Alastair McIntosh was involved in the Harry Super Quarry campaign. You will find out about this in a moment, and you will see how it links so marvelously well with geopoetics and with Kenneth White. And he has done an extraordinary work with a variety of people around the islands, I believe, and around Glasgow itself. He will talk about the GalGael Trust as well. He's also an honorary research fellow in the College of Social Sciences at the University of Glasgow. So let me welcome once again Alastair McIntosh among us, and I hope that you'll enjoy his talk today. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Folks, I'm profoundly deaf these days, hence why I'm using these little microphones to hear, and why this morning I was confusing Kenneth talking about politics and poetics. But given my topic this afternoon, it's quite a convenient confusion, because I want to talk about doing a bardic politics, doing politics in a poetic manner. I was very struck that when Kenneth started speaking this morning, his first move was several layers of gratitude to people who had helped to make today possible. And it has always been my experience that the geopoetic movement has been a very generous movement. Kenneth was very generous to us in the Centre for Human Ecology in the 1990s, when we were having a hard time with these kind of ideas being accepted, and especially their practical application. It used to help enormously in ways that you're going to see unfold in this presentation, when he would share those ideas of multiversity and of the importance of poetics in understanding the nature of life with our staff and students. But also, there was what is now taken form as the Scottish Centre for Geopoetics, directed by Norrie Bissell, and the role of people like Tony McManus and the late Tony McManus and his wife Nano, who is here with us today. These were such important things because, you know, I was a science student, I was not an art student. I wouldn't have got to grips with poetics at all had it not been for the interpretive role that was played by the work that people like Tony and Nano and Norrie there were doing back in the 1990s, that kind of led to an opening of the eyes, and indeed I would say a deepening of the science. So my topic today is geopoetics, the Old Alliance and the Harris Super Quarry Exchange. We were invited, when asked to speak at this conference, to try to make it relevant to the French sponsors that we have here. And I wanted to honour that, not least having had an email a month ago from Kenneth in which I had raised a point with him. And he emphasised the importance of his work in French, aided by the translation of Marie-Claude, his wife, whose hospitality my wife and I well remember, Kenneth, when we visited your house in Brittany many, many years ago. And so together as a husband and wife team working in translating this work to the wider world, Kenneth was just pointing out to me the importance of understanding his work not only from an English language perspective, but also the French language of what is now his adopted country. Of course, in what we in Scotland refer to as the Auld Alliance, a rather loose term historically, but one that has very much come to mean a sense of solidarity between Scotland and France, such as we see in the sponsorship of this conference today. So my main case study today is going to be the Harris Super Quarry campaign, but I will mention GalGael also in passing, just to give you a flavour of what you will be coming to tomorrow morning, those of you who wish to assemble there at 10:15 tomorrow morning. If by any chance you arrive late, just ask to be shown through into our workshop, and you can join one of the parties being shown around there. I will be mentioning the GalGael, but I will be setting this in the context of land and land reform in Scotland, which is what the Super Quarry campaign of the 1990s, finally concluding in 2004, was all about. I should say the danger of this kind of presentation is that it's very easy to give the impression that I was a more central figure in these campaigns than I actually was. I was one of a very many voices in these campaigns. So I can tell my story, but don't be deluded into thinking that that is the only avenue of seeing what was going on. There are many other narratives that together led to what I'm going to unfold here. And so I want to start with the French. My wife is of Huguenot extraction. Her people were rooted in the Cevennes in France, and when we go back on our holidays to that area in the south of France, a major issue is the Relais Stevenson, the Stevenson Trail, the chemin, the road or the way of Robert Louis Stevenson, the Scottish writer, who in 1878 hired a rather uncooperative donkey called, or miscalled, Modestine, and walked from Florac to Arles through the Cevennes mountains. And if you go to where we like to go for our holidays, to Saint-Germain-de-Calbert, a little mountain town there, you'll find round about there, where I'm pointing just now, a little newsagent's shop that is actually a bookshop. And it sells all kinds of stuff concerned with local history, including Stevenson's travels with a donkey in the Cevennes. And it was there that I purchased my copy of this book, although my French is very poor, just schoolboy French, and with my hearing now, I just don't pick up people speaking French to me at all well. Nevertheless, I wanted to have a copy of Kenneth White in the French here, and speaking of this area. And looking through this last night and just refreshing myself as to it, I was struck by the structure that Kenneth unfolds in this book, where he basically travels with Robert Louis Stevenson, looking what he does, and he outlines three structures that speak a lot to my work. And you know, it's impossible for me, Kenneth, to disaggregate what ideas I got from other people, what ideas came from you, but your ideas were, as you know, were very central to the work that I was doing. I actually consider Kenneth to have been, of modern Scottish thinkers, the one who has had the greatest influence on my work and on my activist work, as you're going to see. He distinguishes la première cercle, la première couche est historique et elle concerne les camisards en tant qu'homologue des covenantaires écossais. The first circle, the first layer, is historical, and it concerns the camisards, the Protestant fighters in the Cevennes, analogous to the Scottish Covenanters. So this was the first point of Stevenson's interest, that here with another Scottish people like the Covenanters in mainly lowland Scotland, but they were in the south of France. And White is talking about walking through this landscape and you experience that history embedded in it. Then le deuxième cercle est l'ordre religieux. J'emploie le terme dans un sens très large, existentiel. Dans les Cevennes, Stevenson traverse un passage biblique. The second circle is the religious order. I use the term in a sense that is very large, that is existential. In the Cevennes, Stevenson walks through a biblical landscape. And then what was being talked about mainly today, le troisième cercle, est l'ordre géopoétique, le monde ouvert, bio-cosmopoétique, géopoétique, tout est là. On peut parler d'une existence unifiée. C'est quelque chose de cette nature qui, pas après pas, phase après phase, image après image, a lieu dans le livre Cévenol de Stevenson. The third circle is a geopoetic order, the open world, bio-cosmopoetic. It sounds so much better in the French, doesn't it? So much more poetic in the French. Geopoetic. All is there. One can speak of a unified existence. It's something of this nature that step by step, moment by moment, image after image, the place in the book of the has a place in the book of Stevenson's on the Cevennes. So there you see structure, the historical level, the religious level, the geopoetic level. And when you think back to this morning's presentations, you can see those structures threaded through the presentations. Now, when we go to the Cevennes, I often ask local people, what did Stevenson do for you? And our friend David Radon, who runs a little horticultural shop in the village I was describing, said, and he's a councillor, he's on the commune, the local community council, because it's kind of like they've already got land reform in these parts of rural France. They had a revolution, we never had a revolution. And David said, he gave us back our history. So that's why they love him. And thinking about that, looking through this book last night, I thought, this is what, for me at least, and the way that my work propagates it, but also others in this room, like the boat builder Ian Ochtred here, who also played a big role in introducing me to Kenneth's work. Kenneth has given us back our geography. Geography in a sense of space, geography in a very deep sense of space. If history is about people and geography is about space, it's that Kenneth has given us back. And that is of huge importance in Scotland because of this. Because our space was taken from us, both in the lowland and in the highland clearances, where people were, to use a word borrowed from the French, déraciné, uprooted from their place. And in the 18th and 19th century, literally dispatched on ships. As Alexander Brodie was giving that wonderful presentation earlier, I quickly added to my presentation a reminder of what he was talking about. I Googled it up quickly and I snaffled it and fed it in. And, there you see it in a contemporary magazine representation. And there you see it. Most of you, I think, were at the lecture. You've heard the exposition of that, how the people have virtually faded away because they're being sent off on the emigrant ship. And the amazing thing, Alexander, is that I also Googled in the National Galleries of Scotland site when that picture was made, 1895. And it just so happens my next slide is also from 1895. It was already in place before hearing you today, and there it is. There you see, in the photographic record, the reality of eviction taking place in 1895 in North Uist. That's what it's like. There's two representations of the same loss of space, loss of place, giving us a world divided like this today. Now, my wife says, whatever happened to that body? That was me, age 23, in Papua New Guinea. And it was not until I went there as a VSO volunteer, teaching and setting up small-scale hydroelectric, that people like Margaret Ogumeni here said to me, "What about your land?" And I said, "We don't have any." She said, "But I thought all white people were rich. How can you be rich if you don't have the land?" And with that thought planted in my mind, I came back to Scotland after my second time in Papua New Guinea, ending in 1986, and became aware that under Thatcherism and the investment opportunities created, clearances were again taking place in Scotland because the people were not wanted on the land. One day at the Centre for Human Ecology, where I was by then teaching in Edinburgh University, this man was sent to see me by John Harvey, then the leader of the Iona community. John said, "Tom has a crazy idea, but give him time." He said, "If it gets going, I'll put 100 quid into it." And Tom turned up in my office, a crofter from Scorig, also, once he found out about it, fascinated by geopoetics. And Tom said, "Egg is for sale. I'm trying to form a trust to buy it for the community." Excuse me, just turn down my own volume in my ears a bit. I can switch. So, here's the Isle of Egg, just north of Iona there, and south of the Isle of Lewis, where I grew up. And there you see one of the sales brochures from Vladi Private Islands, a Canadian, Iranian international islands broker. And there's the owner at the time, Keith Schellenberg, who told me that egg was a collector's item and was not the sort of subject that should be for a community buyout. And the question that was growing in my mind was a question triggered partly by the building across many parts of Lewis, several parts of Lewis, with Will McLean's designs and my friend the stonemason Seamus Crawford. Namely, how do you tackle the monolith of landlordism? This is the Land Raiders Monument at Gress on Lewis. And in the design, the circle of the community has been split by the monolith of landlordism landed upon it. This is what we're up against. This is the representation of what we're up against. Notice already the role of the arts coming in raising awareness, what Paulo Freire of Brazil would call conscientization, the coming together of consciousness and conscience about land issues. So this is back in my Taliban days, and there's Tom, there's Bob Harris, a Lochwinnock farmer and poet, died a couple of years ago, and Liz Lyon, a Glasgow artist. The four of us who are the original trustees of the Isle of Egg Trust. Because basically what we did was we said basically, let's see if we can pull one on this. Let's see if we can, somebody, in fact, I heard a land agent putting it the other day, let's see if we can queer the market, or to use our own terminology, let's see if we can engage in market spoiling. Because Schellenberg was hoping to get 3 million for egg. Let's see what we can do. So basically, with the OK of key community gatekeepers on egg, we wrote a manifesto. It's got on the front, "We have sanctuaries for birds, but not for people," Hugh McDermott. And inside it, with his permission, is this poem. "I am a landowner myself after all. I have 12 acres of white silence up the back of my skull." Forgive me, Kenneth, for shouting it out like that. But you did see, when I emailed you the other day, And I said, you know, in the brochure we actually had up the back of my mind, but I'm seeing it Skull. You said that you were playing with that poem, and as time went on, you realised that Skull was more visceral.
Right.
And so...
And it rhymed with all. It also rhymed with all. There are all kinds of reasons.
Exactly. So, just to let you know that in some versions it has mind, in others, and you can see how I've loved using it there, the visceral nature of Skull, because what this poem represented for us is that it was a white horse on which we rode with legitimacy in that land reform campaign. Because when you take on that monolith of power abused, you always feel insecure. The process of empowerment is one of developing a sense of legitimacy, a claim of right, as we would say in other contexts in Scotland. And that's what that poem in that manifesto did. It gave us that legitimacy, it gave us that claim of right. That poem was hugely important, speaking for myself at least, and of the other trustees. So I'm going to cut a very long story very short here. Basically, in time, over 3 years, the islanders themselves developed the confidence and saw the necessity to become part of the trust. So there's the full cohort of trustees. Leslie Riddoch was also involved, one of the broadcaster. She was central to it all. Schellenberg responded by issuing eviction letters to islanders who he saw as being ringleaders. But that just encouraged the old folks even more. So here's old Angus McKinnon with the maps out, and he's teaching the toponyms. He's teaching the meaning of the Gaelic place names to incomers like Karen Halliwell from the south of England and Davy Robertson from Easterhouse, passing on the tradition. And so, as The Guardian has it, a Scottish land rights revolution got going on Egg. Land reform has the potential to be the most radical issue other than devolution for Scotland. We're talking here mid to late 1990s. Why? Because the Scottish Parliament needed justification. And one of those main justifications was politicians saying, if we've got our own Parliament, it means we can stop things like Egg happening again. And so, as you can see, the publicity went international here in the French magazine GEO. And we put on all kinds of interesting fundraising events. It was the best bands in Scotland at the time playing to raise money. And finally, was 10,000 donations, including one big one of $1 million that came from a mystery woman with all we know is that she had a North of England accent. 10,000 small donations mostly. We raised 1.6 million. And I'm cutting a very long story very short, but Egg came into community ownership on 12th of June 1996. 1997. We've just celebrated the 20th anniversary of that. And now you go there, and people come from all over the world to see things like its own electricity grid, the eggtricity grids that you see here, all kinds of examples of what communities can do. And we've now got a situation with land reform legislation in Scotland by which 500,000 acres, that's nearly 3% of Scotland's 19 million acres, is now held in community tenure. And Egg and Assynt, where I'm going to be speaking at their 25th anniversary celebration next month, were pioneers in doing this. And in the case of Egg, I've pointed to the role that geopoetics played. But I'm going to take it deeper, but I've not taken it deeply enough yet. And of course, needless to say, any good geopoetics in Scotland has got to have a bottle of very old Talisker with which to celebrate. And, this wonderful thing on the back of the brochure here, the current island directors in the trust were all children at the time of the buyout. Wow. We're now into the second generation of modern Scottish land reform. So, while this was happening, I was getting people in the cities saying, well, that's okay in Little Hebridean Islands, but what about us here? So the reason that Varen and I have lived in Govan for the past 14 years is that I was one of the founding directors of the GalGael Trust, founded by Johann and Colin MacLeod. You'll meet Johann tomorrow. Her husband passed away at the age of 39, same age as Robert Burns, and in many ways a man of similar calibre, but expressed very differently. And in the GalGael Trust, we work with some of the most broken people in the community and creating a sense of meaning through reconnection with place, expansion into space, the expression of beauty that then finds beauty in human relations. And so we build boats and we go out onto the Clyde and down the river and expand into the space that is Scotland, expand into a reconnection with the river, as Kenneth White calls one of his short poems. "As I looked me alone, I saw a river rin," he quotes Alexander Montgomery from a 16th century poem. "A late afternoon in Govan, at the junction of the Clyde and the Kelvin, rain falling on solemn stone, floating on the dark, dank waters, one lone, mute swan." And I remember, Kenneth, the first time I went out into a GalGael boat, the first thing that struck me was that in this rusty river, there was a beautiful swan. And we rowed down to Bray Head and parked while the guys went in to buy iron brew. And as they were in, and I'm so disappointed nobody else saw it, but a salmon jumped before us the boat. And nobody believed it, but that is applied geopoetics for you. And so Kenneth's poem, Reconnecting with the River, one of our captions, Reconnecting Coastal Communities, Reclaiming Heritage. I want to go deeper into the nature poetics. How's my time going? Can I just do a time check? Sorry? I'm doing fine. Give me a kind of 5-10 minute warning, something like that, just so I don't overrun. I want to move now to, here's the Isle of Lewis, where I was raised. My father was a doctor, and Harris to the south, the mountainous area of Harris. I want to move here, and I want to take this question of the place of geopoetics in activism deeper. I should say, when I say the place of geopoetics in activism, I'm speaking from my experience of it. I'm not trying to push on to Kenneth's worldview, a worldview that isn't his own. My own take, I'm coming from a faith perspective, a universalist faith perspective, but grounded in Christian tradition, which is somewhat different from the perspective that Kenneth takes, which is much more Zen Buddhist type position. So let me stress that this is my use of his work rather than how his work might necessarily be represented. And the issue in Harris is that a major company, Redland, based in England, wanted to make the biggest quarry in the world for roadstone for building motorways. And here's a representation of how Redland portrayed their quarry, and you can see they've taken this shot from low down at sea, so you don't get any sense of the majesty of the mountain. And this was meant to reassure local people that it would merge in, it would hardly be seen. In fact, as they said in the public inquiry, it'll be covered in mist most of the time, so you won't notice the biggest quarry in the world, in the south of Harris, in a national scenic area. Well, let me show you why it is a national scenic area. There's why. That's a quarry taken, that's a mountain, Ronnival, taken from St. Clement's Church. And I want to read to you here the importance of that place by drawing on, do you mind, Neil, just holding that for me as I read. Thank you so much. From Kenneth's book of longer poems, The Bird Path here, I want to read some sections, and I hope Kenneth won't mind. I'm actually going to juggle them about slightly, just for brevity. From his letter from Harris, starting with a quote from Saigu: "Although I compose poetry, I do not think of it as composed poetry, because poetry happens, geopoetics happens, like those McTaggart pictures we saw happening." And I just want to read you a sense of this place, where once there was a monastery going back to Celtic and local tradition says Druid times. The thousand shimmerings this morning, the sea of the monks is a thousand shimmerings. We think of these northern islands as storm-bound and mist-wrapped, yet nowhere can there be greater brilliance of colour. The sea so blue, the rocks so vivid with saffron lichen. A meadow of sea pink in June contains all colours, between white and deep purple, and the white feathered birds reflect the boreal intensity of the summer light. The question in my mind is of going outward, always further outward, to the furthest line of light. And as I was being fed this stuff from Kenneth, I was also being fed by good friends who realized that I needed poetics in my work, was parallel stuff from other cultures. Audre Lorde here. Poetry is not a luxury. It is a vital necessity of our existence. It forms the quality of the light within which we predicate our hopes and dreams towards the survival and change, first made into language, then into idea, then into more tangible action. Quality of the light, the furthest line of light. Again, I diverge slightly here, I think, from Kenneth's approach, in that I don't get from his work that he sees it necessarily as being applied into action, but that's how I'm using it here. And in marked contrast and out of necessity, because here's one of the quarry masters, John Levers, the mastermind of the quarry, and notice how for this press newspaper he has lowered down the sign to the village of Lingraby and twisted it round to suit the convenience of his photograph, as if he can own and distort the place itself. There is no poetry in that kind of quarry master's mindset that numbered the lochs not by their Gaelic names, but by numbers 1, Loch 2, Loch 3, for their own ease of presumed destruction. Well, a huge consortium of mainstream environmental organisations, WWF, FOES, Ramblers, Rural Scotland, RSPB, came together. There were many more too. And if you think of Kenneth's three circles again, the historic, the religious, the geopoetic, in the historic, in the affairs of humankind realm, we did all the conventional stuff. Here's a paper of mine with an economic graft of utility over time. The conventional economic arguments against the quarry, the ecological arguments, the cultural arguments. I felt they weren't cutting deep enough. They weren't getting local traction. We needed to go deeper. I've published my work in the Super Quarry Inquiry in the Journal of Law and Religion in America. And in an endnote on page 779 here, it says, Kenneth White, Professor of 20th Century Poetics at Sorbonne, is one powerful Scottish voice speaking to the relationship between ontology, the study of being, ontology and nature. He writes about the poetics of deep relationship with place. And my address on behalf of the 4 founding trustees to the people of Eigg, when we launched that manifesto on Eigg in October 1991, was published in this Patrick Geddes retrospective edition of the Edinburgh Review, edited by Murdo MacDonald, subsequently Professor of Scottish Art History. And to my astonishment, when the address was published, together with a cutting from the West Highland Free Press, about the people of Eigg giving us a 2/3 vote of confidence in what we were doing, the very next article was by Kenneth White, called Elements of Geopoetics. When people ask me what geopoetics is, I resort to this definition. I know it's a simplified definition, but at least it's in Kenneth's own words. There you have almost pure geopoetics. It is in those rock piles that the poetics lie. Poetry, geography, and a higher unity. Geopoetic. It is in those rock piles. So the Super Quarry Company was saying, it's like a moonscape. And geopoetics is saying, this is part of a higher unity. Through Tony McManus, I was put in touch with Kenneth, and he sent me a copy of this article, this version of it published in Artwork, of his essay, A Shaman Dancing in the Glacier, which ends with the words, again, I am not suggesting that we celebrate any mountain goddess. I'm suggesting that we try and get back an earth sense, a ground sense, and a freshness of the world, such as those men, those Finn men of the Ice Age, knew when they moved over an earth from which the ice had just recently receded. And he has a new paragraph there, I didn't have space here to put it on. This is the dawn of geopoetics. You will often find in Kenneth White's work apocalyptic statements like that. And I use the word apocalyptic, not so much in its popular sense, but in its Greek sense of apo, to take away, and kalypsi, covering, to take away the covering. A bland, frank statement, which you can only do if you are either mad or prophetic. I will say more in a moment about the latter. Artists like Stephen Dilworth, translating a poem by Peter Urpes, who was then editor of the Stornoway Gazette, making art in the mountain to draw attention to it. So here the poem has been translated, the very geopoetic poem, has been translated and written on a layer of peat in lettering soaked in goose fat on the side of the mountain. Another artist, I know not whom, carving this Ronyeval R.I.P. to draw attention to the impending death of this mountain if the super quarry went ahead. Around this time, I started finding myself thinking, even dreaming a lot about eagles. Eagles were nesting on the mountain. And a colleague said to me, why don't you bring in Stone Eagle from Canada? Chief Stone Eagle was warrior chief of the Mi'kmaq people in Nova Scotia. He had stopped a similar super quarry proposal on their sacred mountain, Kluskap Mountain, the mountain of their prophet. Again, to cut a long story short, I raised some funding and was able to bring him over to Scotland to testify in our public inquiry. There you see the mountain from a distance there. And along with that testimony, we heard, I was rather astonished by the conclusion we heard to one of the presentations this afternoon about Calvinism. So here is Scotland's leading Calvinist, Professor Donald MacLeod of the Free Church College, who testified on the grounds that the creation reflects the magnitude of the majesty of God, and it would violate the creation to have a capitalist enterprise of this scale in such a place. Now, in what I was doing here, I was applying a different level of poetics, or if you like, Kenneth's second circle of liberation theology. I was speaking to a very religious Presbyterian Calvinist local community. If you like, the heirs of that Covenanter tradition. And using Bible passages, looking out, researching, using passages like, and Job answered and said, ask now the beasts, and they shall teach thee, and the fowls of the air, and they shall tell thee, or speak to the earth, and it shall teach thee, and the fishes of the sea shall declare unto thee. Who knowest not in all these that the hand of the Lord has wrought this. Whoa! Like a fire, at least in the tradition where I was raised, like a fire going through you. And Walter Brueggemann, eminent Old Testament scholar, in his book about prophetic voices in exile, specifically the Israelites in the time of Jeremiah in Babylonian captivity, quotes Isaiah, and this could be Kenneth White, it's being quoted here. Do not remember former things. Behold, I am doing a new thing. And Brueggemann speaks of actions that were discernible and spoken precisely by these persons with their enormous prophetic imagination. These poets not only discerned the new actions of God that others did not discern, but they wrought the new actions of God by the power of their imagination, their tongues, their words. New poetic imagination evoked new realities in the community. And so we've got Karine Polwood's dad is in the audience tonight. And it's people like her, it's a younger generation like her, who are using poetry, who are using song. For what purpose? But if you wanted to sum up the work of somebody like Karine, it is for the purpose of a new poetic imagination that evokes new realities in the community. These people are not just singers. These people are bards. They speak to the condition of the people. Well, the effect of Stone Eagle was massive publicity flooding into the thing. Stone Eagle to fly in for battle to stop super quarry, inquiry asked to consider God's opinion on the super quarry, etc. Madness in the eyes of much of the world, not so mad on the island. Islanders, for many reasons, withdraw their support for super quarry. Massive swing of opinion against super quarry. It had been 62% in favour, now to 68% against in the course of 2 years of this kind of work and the public inquiry that unfolded these things. The share price of Redland started to collapse because things were getting difficult. And what should happen? But in comes the old alliance. In a predatory takeover on the stock exchange, Redland got swallowed up by the biggest cement company in the world, Lafarge, now Lafarge-Holcim. Now we were no longer saying no to the super quarry, we were saying non, non, et trois fois non to the super quarry. It was at this stage that a French banker, Thierry Grissin, with Groupe Credit Mutuel, was on holiday in Scotland and picked up my book Soil and Soul, where I talk about the land reform and egg and the super quarry. He said, I can't believe that a company with the environmental credentials of Lafarge would be proposing this in the equivalent of a French national park. I managed to get him and his son. It wasn't easy to get a portly French banker up there, but we managed together to get him up to the top of Ronnival. And as soon as he got to the top, he got out his mobile phone. I thought, what the heck's he doing? Making phone calls in such a beautiful place. And he was on to his business colleagues in Paris. And to Dominique Veil, who worked for the French Finance Ministry. And he said, use your influence to set up a meeting with McIntosh and the senior vice presidents of Lafarge. And so, I went to Paris. And I met with Michel Picard, GalGael, forgotten GalGael's second name, and I'm muddling up all the names. I won't try and go there. I met with the three of the senior vice presidents of Lafarge, who were in a conservation partnership with WWF, which is a bit embarrassing for them. And Philippe Hardouin, and GalGael Montelier, and Michel Picard, there we are, let's come back, said to me, well, we know that a little local problem in Harris. Will you arrange a fact-finding mission for us? So here they were asking, you know, me of all people, to arrange a fact-finding mission. And so they came from Paris, and they came to Harris. And they went from Harris back to Paris. And they came back in a private jet that they hired and made the announcement, we have to create value for shareholders, but we want to do it by respecting some values. The combination of both dictates our decisions. We recognise that if we are acting in the best possible way from an environmental standpoint, we will get a competitive advantage. I'm not going to tell them who helped them to draft that statement. Suffice to say that there was geopoetics in there as well. And so they withdrew from the super quarry. But there was one final little bit to the story. That on the night after we had given testimony in the public inquiry, Shawnee Macaulay, local boat builder who Ian knows very well here, they worked together on a number of collaborations and so on in traditional wooden boat building. Shawnee Macaulay, and local historian, Gaelic tradition bearer and Church of Scotland elder. I went to his house. He chaired the quarry benefit group set up by the local Association of Social Services. Because I had no idea what he really thought about the quarry. He was the impartial chair of the quarry benefit group, looking what benefits it would bring and what disbenefits it might bring. And here's a bit of geopoetics for you. Because as I was leaving his house, during which time he gave me no opinion of what he thought of the day's proceedings, he handed me a bag, the weight of a bag of sugar, and he said, give that to Chief Stone Eagle. I said, what is it? He said, that contains the summit rock of Mount Ronival that I have broken off in his honour. Woo! I said, I don't think you'll be able to accept it. You know what native people are like about such things. The next morning, I took Sully and Stone Eagle Herney to the Callanee stones. If this looks like a painting, it's because it was an intricate picture that his partner, or his then partner, Ishbel, gave to me, and it got wet, hence this kind of slightly surreal air to it. And I said, Sullivan, I have a gift for you from the elder. Oh, that's good, he said, I like gifts. I said, but I'm not sure if you will be able to accept it. I will accept anything from the elder. He had been impressed by Shawnee Macaulay. It takes one shaman to see another shaman. I handed it to him. He opened it. What is this, he said. And he started to shake, and his face went red. I told him what it was. He said, I cannot accept that. What has become of you people that you should decapitate your own mountain? I said, the elder said to tell you, it's better than having a super quarry. Stullian stood there, and at length he said, I cannot accept this as a gift, but I'll tell you what I can do. Under the terms of our 1853 treaty with the British, we agreed to look after your settlers who are stranded in the snows in winter. And under the terms of that same treaty, I will take your mountaintop into sanctuary and return it when the mountain is saved. So it was in 2004 when Lafarge withdrew from the super quarry. I went to Nova Scotia. Lawrence, one of the medicine men here, put on a sweat lodge. You can see what carpet offcut shops are used for in Canada. And conducted a ceremony in which I was handed back the mountaintop, duly purified. And with a group of friends from the island and Shawnee Macaulay and my wife Veren, we climbed the mountain high up above St. Clement's Church, where the monks used to be, looking out across a sacred landscape studded with islands of religious connotations. And on top of the mountain was Shawnee and Veren and Shawnee MacDonald, Rusty and Alec George Morrison, who were my old school friends from Lobos. We've known each other since first year in primary. We laid out the Summit Rock and other stones I'd been given in Nova Scotia. And if Kenneth talks about a shaman dancing on the glacier, all I can say, Kenneth, is they're still here. They are still here. You can read Shawnee Macaulay's statement on my website. I just recently posted it. It's a statement of deep ecology. And we took the Summit Rock and symbolically, with the help of a little bag of Lafarge cement, we stuck it back onto the mountain. And I should say, Lafarge were exemplary. They even gave €30,000 donation to the local football pitch as a kind of apology for having messed the community around. And so at the end of the saga, and the mountain today rests intact. Le troisième cercle est d'ordre géopolitique. Le monde ouvert, biocosmopoétique, géopoétique, tout est là. On peut parler d'une existence unifiée. C'est quelque chose de cette nature qui, pas après pas, phase après phase, image après image, a lieu dans la vie de l'Écosse d'aujourd'hui. Merci beaucoup.
Alastair, for such an inspiring and fiery talk about geopoetics in Scotland. I'm sure there will be some questions from the public.
Just one quick one, Alastair.
But I just switch over here. Go for it.
I believe, if I've got it right,
Beg your pardon, I'm switched off. I've got my wee mic here.
when Lafarge have the tremendously ambitious and no doubt extremely expensive project. The announcement, public announcement, did not come by the newspapers. Is that right? Did they not come to the local village hall?
Oh yeah, I mean they literally hired that jet and they flew from Paris to make the announcement in person
To the local people.
because they realised that by taking over the English company Redland, they had inherited something that was potentially very bad publicity for them. And so they really wanted to make a statement in terms of their own corporate ethics, that this kind of thing in such an area and in such a community wasn't the way that they did business. And of course, you know, I did everything I could to encourage them in that way of thinking, because I said, you know, okay, well they said to me, you know, Alastair, we all use quarry products, how should we do it? And I said, well, you're all operating on a level playing field, and usually companies like yours drive down the level of the playing field by trying to get rid of environmental protection. But I said, has it occurred to you that there is competitive advantage to be had by raising the level of the level playing field? So everybody's got to cooperate at a higher level of business ethics or be driven out. And they very much took that argument on board. And so they flew in, and it was in the, as we say, in the Leverborough village school it was. they made the announcement to the community and also handed over to Morag Monroe, the councillor, a cheque for €30,000 to help repair the football pitch, and said, you know, that's our acknowledgement that we've kind of been part of messing this community around with something that we now realise was a bad idea.
For example, capitalism can begin to shift, begin to change.
Are you leaving now, sir?
Yeah, it's actually fine. You're loud and clear. I'm calling you in here. If you're no good, I'll switch you off.
My wife would wish you could do that. So, doing things at Bargate Quay is obviously going to work in Harris. How well did it work in the Lafarge ballroom? Obviously you got something, but did you have to change the approach to do that?
Well, it's very interesting you asked that, because part of the story that I didn't tell you today because of time is that when they got back to me and said, oh, thank you. Part of the story I didn't tell you about because of time is that when they agreed to withdraw and they got back to me and said, but Alastair, we all use quarry products, you too. They asked me if I would serve on their sustainability stakeholder panel. And I said, what, your greenwash panel? And he said, well, look, you know, we really are trying to take seriously this whole business of raising the level of the playing field. That's why we're in partnership with WWF, World Wildlife Fund, or whatever you want to call it. And they said, you know, we've accepted your arguments about Harris, but will you help us to do our business better? I should say that from a previous incarnation, I've got a financial MBA, so it was kind of, you know, I knew how to speak their language. And I said, well, I don't know about that. I said, I'll need to consult. So, you know, all those organizations you saw there, I consulted with all of the figures I've been in association with and said, what do you think? And they all came back unanimously the same. They said, do it, because we need to have these kind of engagements when we consume these products. But don't take their money except for expenses. So for 10 years I was on that panel. And, you know, twice a year we'd meet in Paris. Sometimes the third time we'd go to some site to see a quarry or see industrial ecology in place, like the site in former East Germany, where they're burning a filthy form of lignite in the kilns, and so they have to purge it of the sulfur using limestone, and that makes gypsum. So they've got this amazing plant where well, it's actually a power plant that's burning the lignite to make energy. And then there's a conveyor belt that takes all the gypsum, the powdered gypsum from cleaning the chimneys, takes us in a continuous process into a factory next door that makes plasterboard. And so you literally get pollution being produced in one spot, captured, and a couple of 100 yards away, a conveyor belt with household not chipboard, but plasterboard coming off it. The most interesting part of those meetings was the board meetings once a year, chaired by the chief executive, who was laterally Bruno Lafont. And Bruno said to me, we know that our values are our value in stock exchange terms. And I said, well, if that's the case, if you really understand that, don't take any advice I give you unless long-term you think it will improve your share price. Because if you do, your share price will go down and you'll go the way Redland went. Well, over those 10 years, we saw them cut by 1/3 their carbon dioxide emissions. I'm talking about audited emissions. This is the biggest cement company in the world. We saw them slash the level of other pollutants that you get in the course of making cement. We saw them move to a stage where all of their new quarries had biodiversity restoration plans built in. We saw them take on anti-corruption measures and a whole raft of things. The final triumph we got was that Jean-Paul Jean Renaud of WWF International and myself had worked on them for a long time to formally recognize the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. No other extractive company had done this. And Lafarge, like many extractive industries, were in the business of sometimes moving indigenous people of their land in the 80 or so different countries of the world in which they worked. And finally, just in the couple of years before I came off the panel, they formally acknowledged their acceptance of the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which includes the right not to be moved in order to extract resources. I should add that that has changed now because they're now, merged with Holcim. That panel has since dissolved, and I know they've set up something else, but I don't know what the story is on it. All I can say is that for those 10 years, it was some very impressive work, of which you will find full details, including the annual reports, on my website, if you want to check it out further.
I'd like to add something about the GalGael Trust and the very beautiful story which explains the meaning of the name, if I may remind people, as perhaps you know. On the website, if you go and check, you will find that GalGael, or the Gaelic-speaking...
Yes, the GalGael. The Gal is the stranger, as in places things like Galway or Galway or Inishgal, the Outer Hebrides. The places where stranger blood, incomer blood, had intermingled, mainly Norse blood in the 9th century. Hence why we've got on our premises established in the 9th century. And the Gael are the heartland people. And so, we're working in a very poor part of Glasgow. Tomorrow you will encounter some very vulnerable people with addiction issues, mental health issues, homelessness issues, and so on. Can I just say, if you are photographing, if you're taking anybody close up, please ask their permission first, because some of them are in vulnerable states. They might not want to be photographed. And we're recognizing that the bottom line problem of poverty is lack of connection, lack of being held in the basket of community. And that means building a strong sense of identity. But how do you do that in a multi-ethnic, multicultural world? You do that by the GalGael principle. We are all GalGael now. There is a bit of the stranger and a bit of the indigenous in all of us. But we must all learn to become indigenous to place again. We must all seek that earth grounding that Kenneth White is constantly talking about. And you see how important, that the legitimacy of what Kenneth was saying back in the 1990s there. You see how important it is to our thinking. And why, it wasn't me that suggested Kenneth as patron. It was either Colin or Jehan said, can you get that guy to agree to be our patron? Because we are on about what he's talking about. And I think tomorrow will be Kenneth's first time in our premises. And, I hope that part of what he will see there is a testimony in wood and stone and in people to the importance of his own work.
And there's also an interesting connection I meant to mention with the iconic Hebridean galley of Berlin, because it became the emblem of the GalGael Trust, which is devoted to building boats in order to build the community spirits and help people regain the sense of identity that is always, as we know, made of something of the home people, of the heartland people, and something of the nomad, of the stranger, of someone who also knows how to go away, as Kenneth White did, and then come back and bring this sense of identity. And as Alastair McIntosh so beautifully said, he gave us back our geography. He gave us back our space.
Could I just mention, Luke Devlin up there is one of my former students in the Centre for Human Ecology, and he's now doing his PhD now, basically on the geopoetics of the Clyde Valley area, if I might summarise it, with Heriot-Watt University. So if any of you don't know Luke but would like to meet him, give them a wave again, Luke, so they can see who you are.